All right, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for the House Minority Caucus Committee on Sexual Misconduct. I'm Dar'shun Kendrick. I represent State House District 93. We'll go ahead and get started, and first we will have some testimony from Ms. Mishia Bean.
Yes, how are you doing? I know 43% of women have filed charges of sexual assault on, by their supervisor. I have too been assaulted many years ago by my supervisor, which was a police officer. I used to come in the morning, and he used to always ask for a hug every morning, so I just blew him off. One morning, he countered me in the break room, and I felt I had to give him a hug to get out the room. So I left, didn't think about that after that time. Another time I was at the elevator, and he came up behind me, and he put his right arm around my neck, left arm around my waist, and I my eyes bulged out. I immediately grabbed his arm off of me, and I felt his breath on my neck and his crotch on my behind. And I turned around, and I told him, please don't ever touch me again. I'm good. And all he said with the creepy smile is that I'm just saying good morning to you. So by the end of the day, I didn't think nothing else of it. So I was at my desk one morning, and he came up behind me again. And he put his arms around my shoulder, squeezing real tight, and kissed me on my cheek twice. I immediately jumped up and grabbed an empty plastic Coke bottle, and I hit him 3 times in the shoulder. And there were other officers in the room at the time, and they just stood there and looked, and I'm screaming at my assaultant and asking him, don't ever touch me again. I told you don't ever touch me again. And he's laughing it off and put his hands up and saying, calm down, it's not that serious. And I yelled at the other employees, don't you see you're not going to say anything? And they just sat there and looked. So end of my shift, I just put an incident report to my boss and let him know what happened. The next day, my boss called, and he begged me not to press any charges because he said he can lose his business. And then he said, please don't press any charges. I mean, and don't forget how I met you, because I met my boss at a nightclub. And I told him at the time I was looking for a job. So I went to the job and put an application in. So all I was told by my boss was that he'll make sure that the supervisor would not be around me. So another incident, I was at my computer, and I could see the reflection behind me. And he came up, he peeped his head through the door. He did the gun gesture with his hand. At that moment, I put in my 2 weeks' notice, but that only lasted one day because I felt threatened, and I was afraid to press any charges. And all that stuff brought back memories of me being molested by my grandfather, and I just didn't want to be there at that office. So, but we have to speak out against this. And I wish I would have said something years ago, but I was so terrified to say anything. But now it's been many years later, and it's time is up. Time is up. And I said we all part of the same puzzle, but just in different pieces. So that's my story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bean, for your story. HB 662, the Sexual Misconduct Bill, is sponsored by myself and co-sponsored by Representatives Mary Margaret Oliver, Representative Derek Jackson, Representative Kim Schofield, Minority Chair James Beverly, and Minority Leader Bob Tremmel. HB 662 requires us, as members of the legislature, to set the example, like many of our private businesses, and requires legislators to go through training in a wide range of illegal and inappropriate activities, including sexual harassment. This bill is broader than the Senate version in that it includes all cases of sexual misconduct, not just those involving employer-employee relationship, which is included in the definition of sexual harassment. This training would take place every term at either our biennial or offered at another appropriate time so that all members of the legislature will be able to take part in the training from experts in the field. Under HB 662, every member of the legislature would be required to file an affidavit stating they took the training and understand what sexual misconduct is. We understand that sexual misconduct is a serious crime that is below the dignity of this office, and looking for solutions to make sure that no one, no matter their title or lack thereof, will be treated with respect. HB 662 is one step in the right direction. Next, I will have the co-chair of the House Caucus, Minority Caucus Sexual Misconduct Committee, Mary Margaret Oliver, to come and give some remarks.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your attendance today. I want to begin by thanking Chair of the Minority Party, James, and Minority Leader Bob Trammell for appointing a special Minority Party committee on sexual harassment and sexual misconduct. We have issued and reviewed and studied the issue of sexual harassment and have a preliminary report, and there's some copies available on the front row if anyone would like one. I'm very happy to report that our conversations have been timely, substantive, and detailed, and that we have joined leaders of the majority party in preliminary discussions working in a bipartisan way to bring both our employee handbooks, our ethics code rules, and our statutes up to date and to modernize and make our comprehensive approach to preventing sexual harassment appropriate for today's needs. Obviously, we're having a national conversation. This morning, the Wall Street Journal reports in a very interesting article on the impact of mandatory training on legislators across the states. It's a very interesting article. I urge you to read it. It talks about particularly those states where there are egregious and public incidents coming to the press at this time. We're fortunate in Georgia, I think, that we don't have a very visible, very individual-focused case to generate our discussion on sexual harassment. I think that gives us a greater opportunity to do what our broadly representative committee has done, which is study the policies of the National Conference on Legislation, study some of the issues that are brought forth in the states that have taken the most aggressive stance on sexual harassment training. We have looked at EEOC rules and mandates. We have reviewed some of the practices of the military. We've reviewed some of the practices of the unions in relation to how other entities, private and public, address the issues of sexual harassment. I anticipate continuing to work with the Republican leadership in a bipartisan way in order to bring our statutes together in the most effective way. We have different legal entities under our state capitol. We have a House, we have a Senate, we have a set of joint committees, and they have slightly different issues set forth in each of the rules or regulations in relation to either training or sexual harassment. We need to make our policies consistent. We need to think about the ways in which we can make mandatory training most effective. The Wall Street Journal this morning and other examples, particularly like Colorado, have done some in-depth studies of trying to figure out what policies, what trainings are most effective. And that's a very important ongoing discussion. We in Georgia recognize that this is a national issue. It's an issue where we're studying it thoughtfully, I hope, and in depth, I hope, and bringing forward agreements and policies and changes in the law and rules that will protect victims of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct in our state capitol. Thank you very much, and I think Leader Trammell is the next person to address this issue.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Trammell, the Democratic leader in the House, and I just want to first start with a series of thank yous. I want to thank our chair, James Beverly, for appointing this committee. I want to thank the co-chairs of this committee, Representative Oliver and Representative Kendrick, and I want to thank every member of the committee that have worked thoroughly and diligently in examining this issue. The reason and purpose for the creation of the committee was so that we could, was several-fold, but first and foremost so that we could provide balanced input into the process the subcommittee that was appointed by the Legislative Services Committee. This is a very serious issue, and we wanted to make sure that we took a very thorough examination. I'm extremely proud of the work that our caucus committee has done in this area. I would also like to thank the Speaker's Office and the chair of the subcommittee of the Legislative Services for their openness to work through these issues in a bipartisan fashion and to take the suggestions that have come from the committee and the suggestions in the proposed legislation so that we can come up with a bipartisan solution to this issue. So thank you all for being here. I'll turn it back over to Representative Kendrick.
All right. Thank you so much for everyone who attended this press conference. We still have a little ways to go to make sure that we come up with a solution that's going to benefit all of Georgia. So thank you to everyone that attended the press conference. At this time, if anybody has any questions, then I will take those.
So this bill seems to deal mostly with training, and the legislative subcommittee that Minority Leader Trammell referred to is dealing with the rules of the House. I don't know if other things are being addressed, such as clear definitions of harassment, examples of harassment, clear methods of reporting and confidentiality. Are either your bill or the subcommittee going to deal with those issues?
Many of those issues are already addressed in the Ethics Committee's rules and procedures, and we are discussing those issues in detail. Where are the gaps? I think that we are in agreement that everybody needs to be covered by sexual harassment sanctions, sexual harassment prohibitions, and by training. But there's some legitimate questions that we're ongoing having a discussion about. We can mandate that lobbyists and interns have an opportunity under our rules and under our statutes to make complaints, but I'm not sure we can mandate that lobbyists have training. I'm just giving you one example of an issue that's an ongoing discussion. How would we sanction lobbyists? How would we sanction a private party coming into the Capitol who we want to cover for this? The issues of who is covered, the issue of sanctions, the issue of how the process works for different kinds of folks that we want to cover are all part of the discussion. But we are going to broaden the opportunities for the ethics committees in both House and Senate and expand our employee manuals to clear up some inconsistencies and to make sure that as many people as come into this environment, this unique political environment, have protections against sexual harassment.
I have a question for Leader Trammell. Have y'all committed to, has the Democratic Caucus committed to supporting whatever recommendations come out of the special committee that you're serving on?
So at this point in the conversation, as you know, the subcommittee is still in the process of drafting its proposals and recommendations. We've had meetings, and we're very hopeful and optimistic that what will come out of there will be something that we can support in terms of the timing of that. Obviously, we haven't taken that up as a caucus until we have the final product.
And what's the status of that? Last we heard is the Speaker Pro Tem said there would be another meeting by the end of January. That hasn't happened?
And so my understanding is it's still in the drafting formation. So that's where the process is at this juncture.
So you're working on mandated training, reporting requirements, tying up loose ends. Through your study committee, what have you learned about existing law here in Georgia regarding sexual harassment and sexual misconduct here at State Council?
Sexual harassment is defined by EEOC regulations and by federal case law. So all of us are learning about that in depth, where we can moderate and where it's necessary some of our rules and bring them forward. I am very heartened by our early discussions with the Republican leadership, issues we seem to be agreeing about mandatory training, about covering everybody, about closing any loopholes that there may be in the variety of different documents and entities that oversee employee behavior. We don't have in the Capitol somebody who looks like a human resources chair that exists at Coca-Cola or SunTrust. We have different entities that operate in historically, politically ways. But I'm very heartened by the cooperative discussions we've had in an early way, and we seem to be in agreement on many issues thus far.
But I'm talking about as far as previous reporting. Is sexual harassment rampant at the state capitol? Is what people want to know.
I think the press has been talking to a lot of folks off the record. There have been stories reported that whatever incidences or whatever history may have existed in the Capitol, that for a lot of different reasons, women do not want to come forward. And I support any victim's right to make a decision whether he or she wants to come forward. It's a very significant decision. In relation to that, our goal in updating our code and our code of conduct is to make sure that victims know they can come forward earlier than the incidents this lady had to face. It is the progressive, aggressive activity that is most egregious in the workplace. And those are the kinds of issues that, based on a collaborative discussion, we can tell victims that they should come forward early. And I think that will be the best remedy to preventing further injury and harassment and misconduct.
And just a follow-up note. So I was tasked by another colleague of mine, asked to do some research and see sort of what sort of training we provided to employees of the state of Georgia. And my last communication was that there's currently no requirement of sexual harassment training for state agencies. A lot of them do it, but it's not a requirement, except for, and this is interesting, except for the IT department. Apparently, the IT department has a sort of a mandatory sexual harassment training. So I'm still learning a lot more about what the different agencies sort of training that they do have, but that is the last piece of information I had about specific agency training. Any more questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.